Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Britt and this is Britt's Wickedry. This is part 2 in a two-part series where I am going through and ranking all 51 of the books that I read in 2025. I know. In the first video, I said that I was going to try to keep my descriptions of the book very brief so that I didn't run the video so long, and I still ended up, I feel like when I was editing, yapping so much in that video. So I am going to really try to keep my commentary very minimal this round so that hopefully it's not another like hour-long video like that one was, but I can't promise anything. So since this is part 2 in the two-part series, I'm not going to give like the whole spiel here. If you want to hear a little bit more about my 2025 reading journey and my experience and kind of like the explanation of my tier ranking system and all of that, please go and watch part 1 video for this, where I cover all of that plus January through June's books and put those on the board. Here is where we are currently at with that ranking, and I am now going to pick up in this video right off the bat starting in July's reads. And again, just a reminder, if you see me like looking down, it's because I'm checking my notes on everything that I wrote down as I was doing the ranking system so that I can accurately depict that here in what I'm saying in the video. Okay, let's get started with the very first book that I read in July, which was called The Flesh of the Sea. This book is written by a self-publishing duo, Laura Gislason, I believe is how you say that, and Shelley Levine are the two authors who wrote this book. It is a self-published horror novella that is historical in nature. So this takes place on the sea in a pirate ship. Basically, this young man from historical England is sent by his society to ride on a navy ship to go and complete this specific task for them. However, the navy ship gets boarded by a pirate ship who basically come in, rob the ship. However, they learn that this person, this young man, has experience in the medical field and their ship doctor just died recently and they're in need of a medical guy. So they basically kidnap him to come and work for them on their pirate ship. And that's kind of how this all kicks off. And we're reading this book through letters between the young man that was kidnapped and his friend that he left behind in England. Through each letter that he's sending is like another kind of mini horrific tale on some kind of shenanigans that the pirates got themselves into, and how that affected this young man who, of course, was kidnapped and forced into this position, but then over time, the more that he does it, he actually begins to realize that maybe the life of a pirate isn't so bad after all, and that maybe he prefers it to, English society. And this book gets really gross. If you are like me and you have like phobias of the ocean and ocean creatures, like I don't even eat fish. I don't like the ocean. I don't like swimming in the ocean. I don't like eating fish. None of that. It all gives me the spooks and the creeps. And if you're like me at all, then I think you're going to really enjoy this horror. It definitely made me feel a little grossed out and squeamish at certain times. And it was overall just a really fun adventure. I am going to rank this one in tier 4 for Give Me More because I definitely think that this is one of the most kind of fun and well done historical horror novel that I've read from a pair of indie authors, and so I'm definitely interested in seeing more of what they have to offer. From there, I actually did a buddy read of Project Hail Mary with my husband. We listened to the audiobook together. We were making lots of trips between our house down in New Orleans and where we were moving up in North Louisiana. And so we had a lot of time in the car, so we kind of buddy listened to Project Hail Mary during all of that. And this pleasantly surprised me, actually. I thought that it was the perfect middle ground for some of the things that I like to read, as well as some of the things that my husband likes to read. And I had a good time with it. I found it humorous. I found it covering a lot of themes and questions that I like about the world and about humanity and things like that I really, really enjoyed and found intriguing. So this follows a man who kind of wakes up in a spaceship literally in the middle of space, with being the only survivor of like a dead crew. So like everybody else in the spaceship who was with him has died, and he can't even remember why he's there. And it kind of goes from there, following him slowly beginning to understand more about like why he's there, what is retrieve his memories and figure out what is the job that he was even sent here to do, and how can he achieve that now that he's all by himself. And there is actually a movie now being made of this that is being released, I believe, sometime this year in 2026, that I'm very excited to watch once it comes out. So I am going to rank this one also in tier 4 for Gimme More. I have not read anything else by this author, but I would be interested to, of course, pick up something else that he's written, because I did enjoy this read. The next thing that I read in July was Slasher Crew by Chris Heinecke. And this one unfortunately didn't do it for me. I ended up rating this one, or putting this in the rank of 1 for why. And before I get into why I did that, first let me explain kind of what it is. It's an urban fantasy, basically, that I saw being compared to kind of like Buffy, like the old Buffy TV show. And as I said, this year I found myself being kind of nostalgic about different things that I've liked, and picking up books that I felt kind of represented that, and Buffy was one of those. So when I saw the comparison to Buffy, I was very excited to pick this book up. Unfortunately, I could not get into this one. I did not care. I did not care about this adventure that this girl was going on, who, of course, she's a monster hunter, like a slayer. And as she is tracking down this particular monster, she finds herself on this cruise where a bunch of shenanigans happen. I also did not know that this book was related to another series that this author has, and so maybe the reason why I just couldn't find myself getting into this one at all was that I just didn't have that background that maybe many people do coming into this. And so maybe it was my fault, maybe it's a me thing, but it didn't work for me. I could not get into it. Then after that, I was really looking for a pick-me-up, because I was so not feeling that one, that I went and picked up a fantasy called The Tainted Cup. This is the first book in the Shadow of the Leviathan series by Robert Jackson Bennett, and this follows, it's kind of like a Sherlock Holmes Watson dynamic, but set in like a high fantasy world. One that is got lots of themes of like biopunk and like plant science. So it's kind of almost like a little bit, I don't want to say sci-fi, but it does have a sort of sciencey feel with the way that the world is constructed and the way in which they use plants and different other aspects of nature to change the bodies of the humans who live in that world to be able to get various different kinds of abilities. But as I mentioned, it's following this Sherlock Holmes Watson type duo who find themselves solving the murder of this military man who died in this completely wild, unexplainable way. And we have two characters. Anna is kind of like our Sherlock Holmes, and Den is kind of like our Watson. And we're reading mostly from the point of view of Den, who has been recently assigned to be Anna's assistant. Anna is kind of different. She's a little bit of a different kind of person. She's kind of I don't know how to explain it. Like, she's kind of whimsical. She's kind of wacky. She wears a blindfold every time she goes out because she doesn't want her senses to be overwhelmed. She wants to stay sharpened and focused on the task at hand. And so she uses Den basically as her eyes because he has a specific ability that allows him to remember every single moment of his life that he's ever lived. So he can go into these crime scenes, investigate, and be able to recall every single detail easily. He will do that and then go back and basically tell Anna everything that he's seen, and together they will work to solve this mystery. And this is such a cool idea. Not only is the mystery part of it really interesting, but this is a book that has that as like the core storyline, but there's so much else going on behind that. For example, such rich world building and such unique and well-developed cultures and subcultures and a world history that I just found so interesting. So the mystery part of it and the duo between those two characters was extremely fun to watch, and the mystery unraveled in a way that really kept me intrigued. But it was the world building that kind of did it for me and that kind of blew me away. I love it, and just based on that, I wanted to keep reading in the series like immediately to pick up the next one. I didn't because I had other things going on, but I wanted to dive right into book 2 because it was so interesting, and I wanted to learn more about these creatures called the Leviathans and kind of how that all works and plays into the different mysteries and corruptions and murders that these two are solving in this world. So I ended up rating this one in tier 5 for top tier because I had such an amazingly good time with it, and I find it so interesting. I cannot wait to finish this series. After that, I picked up another indie horror called Welcome to Nightmare Island. This one is by Devin Cabrera, and this one follows a group of friends who go on a vacation together every year, usually to like a haunted or scary location of some kind, because that's where their interests lie. And this year, one of the group happened to find this island that is supposedly very, very, very haunted, and they were going to go stay on this, or inside of this hotel on this island, basically have a tour and do a bunch of spooky stuff, right? That's what they were expecting. So they do that, and they get to this island. And there seems to be more going on than they had originally thought. This one, unfortunately, while the idea of that really intrigued me, I did not like this one. I think that this idea could have been done in a much better way. I didn't find that the author's voice and writing style was something that I was enjoying. I didn't like any of the character and character development going on. And I just overall was ready for that book to be done basically as soon as I started it, which is never really a good sign. This one is going into tier 1 for Y. And then after that kind of low and then high and then low, I was again really hoping that I could find something that I liked. And so I kind of leaned back into that nostalgia again because it seemed to have been working for me for the most part. And I went back and did a reread of The Hunger Games. This is a book that at that point I hadn't read for like over a decade before. So I did read the entire series when I was a teenager, kind of like at the height of their popularity. And I loved it then. And I know that the author has recently, over the past couple of years, added 2 new books to the original series. And I have not read those 2 books, but I want to. But I didn't want to jump into those without revisiting the originals. When I got into this book, I was a little worried that I was not going to enjoy it as much as I kind of remember myself enjoying it when I was a teenager, because, as I've kind of mentioned, I find myself not jiving with a lot of YA books. I feel like I've gotten to that point in my life where I just can't maybe necessarily relate as much, and the writing just doesn't seem to do it for me as well as other types of books do. So that was kind of my fear. And I was a little worried that it was going to taint it for me, like taint my memories just a bit, but that is not the experience that I had at all. I loved revisiting these characters. I loved this book. And as soon as as soon as I got back into it, literally like the first couple chapters, I was like, you know what? There's a reason that this series got so popular. This is a great book. Like, her writing is amazing. I think it was like the first or second chapter, whenever that the first reaping happens, I remember just putting it down. I had like the chills. I was like, that is wild. I knew it was going to happen. I've read it before. I've watched all of the movies and still had that much of like an impact on me. Yeah, this is an amazing book, and I am so happy that I loved it again the second time through. So yeah, this goes in top tier. Still one of my favorite books I've ever read. Still gave me such a strong emotional reaction. So top tier for The Hunger Games. After that, kind of roller coaster of high, low, or low, high. I then moved on to another indie book. I was looking for something that was vastly different than anything else that I had read recently, and I was also wanting to really hone into like those summer feelings with those ocean themes, those mermaid themes. I wanted something to do with like mermaids or sirens. So I found this book called The Siren and the Sea, which is like a fantasy romance novella about this shifter. She's like an otter shifter, I believe, and of course like a merman. And this one, I don't know, it was okay for what it was, I guess. I don't know. I didn't find myself particularly drawn to the characters. I didn't find myself particularly drawn to the writing. I didn't really care about the situation that they were in, or that the or like their budding relationship at all. I don't know if maybe I just had too high of expectations going into this one, because it was such a short novella, and it was probably for, people who like fantasy romance a lot more than I do, who kind of just wanted like a little bite-size story. And so like for it, what it was, I guess it was okay, but it just did not do it for me. I ended up ranking this one in tier 1 for why, because I don't know. I think it was wrong of me to pick up. It was not my vibe. And I think that in many cases, fantasy romance can be okay for me, but it's got to be a fantasy romance that has a plot and really intricate world building and something for me to care about, because just a romance isn't really my thing. Just a relationship between two characters that I don't have any emotional connection to just doesn't do it for me usually. So I should have known better going into that one, unfortunately, and the rating reflects that. So then after that, I was still wanting mermaids. I still wanted that vibe that I felt I didn't really get from this book, and I ended up going to a genre I'm usually much more likely to enjoy, the horror genre, and I picked up Rolling in the Deep by Mira Grant. So this is actually like a prequel novella to another book that she releases, that is called Drowning in the Deep or something like that. We'll get to it later because I do read it shortly after this one. But Rolling in the Deep follows a group of people on this ship as they are trying to film a documentary locating mermaids, and they find them. Unfortunately, these mermaids are not the friendly type, and it basically becomes an all-out massacre. And this was actually really entertaining for me. I loved the way that the author designed these mermaids. I found them very intriguing and very unique in a sense. Killer mermaids are a win for me in my book, and I liked the way the author put the story together. And so I ended up ranking this one on tier 4 for Give Me More, because as soon as I finished this novella, I was like, yeah, I definitely want to read the full book that comes after this one, which was a full-length novel. And after I finished Rolling in the Deep, I went on to pick up another kind of oceany creature type book, because I really wanted, like I said, I was trying to hone into those like summery vibes, and I picked up Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. And Remarkably Bright Creatures is basically like a literary novel. I can't remember honestly what it was about this book that drew me to it necessarily. Somehow I ended up deciding to read it, even though I don't typically do literary. And again, this is probably my fault that I did not enjoy it as much as, others may, because it just isn't my typical genre. I found the main character likable enough. There just unfortunately was not enough going on in this book to keep my interest. It had a little bit of magical realism with like a talking, or not talking, thinking octopus. Like he had coherent thoughts, and we followed his point of view in various chapters. But then beside that, we were following basically this retired old woman whose husband and son have both passed, and she's just kind of like living her life, and we're following her day to day. And then we do follow another character as well as he goes on his journey to like track down his father who he's never met. And it was just a bunch of like people doing daily life stuff. And I have enough daily life stuff going on in my own life. I don't find myself particularly drawn to read that kind of stuff. I got very bored, unfortunately. So this wasn't a bad book. It was really well written. I actually found myself enjoying a lot of like lines that were written in the story as I read it. It just wasn't the right book for me. I am learning that those slower, more kind of meandering literary type fiction books are not my cup of tea. So unfortunately, this one is getting ranked in tier 2 for meh. I did forget to mention before saying this one that we are now in August. So that was an August read for me, and I only had one other book in August that I read. That was You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kaylin Bayron. And this is another YA horror that follows, the idea was actually really, really interesting, which is kind of what drew me to this. It follows this teenager who works at this summer camp that years before a really popular horror movie was filmed, like a slasher summer camp movie. You get the vibes. And now, years later, somebody has purchased this summer camp and turned it into like this entertainment reenactment type theme park, sort of, where people can come and like they buy a ticket and they get to stay overnight at this camp and kind of like live out this movie, sort of. So they basically will get chased by like a fake killer, and it's basically like a challenge. Can you survive the night, basically? And she works as kind of like the manager of this place. And her and these other teenagers are on the job when things start happening that at first may seem like it's part of the camp, but then it starts to not line up, and they realize maybe something else terrible is actually going on here, something really scary. Again, this kind of had very obvious YA writing that kind of limited my enjoyment of it. I feel like if this was aged up a bit more, this was an idea that I could really find myself super enjoying. But that said, I did have a lot of fun with this. I thought it was very campy, lots of nods to like real life horror movies that have gotten really big. I just personally felt like the characters and some of the things they would say and in ways that they would act were quite cringy, and that kind of limited my enjoyment of it a bit. However, it is a book that I think that my YAH daughter would enjoy if she were to pick up and read it. But I ended up ranking this one on tier 3 for That'll Do Donkey, and then from there we move into September's reads, and in September I decided to go ahead and pick up Into the Drowning Deep, which is the full-length novel from Rolling in the Deep, that novella. And this one follows now one of the people from like documentary crew who have now disappeared. The sister of one of them joins this scientific ship who is going out to try and figure out what went wrong with the documentary crew. Like there was a video that released from that original one that showed like these mermaids, of course, attacking the humans, and they're going to go and debunk this. They're going to try to prove whether this is true or not. And the sister of one of the missing documentary crew people get on this ship to kind of, like, she has a dedicated plan to figure out what happened to her sister and kind of bring down the company that the documentary crew worked for. She thinks that they have some responsibility surrounding the disappearance of this crew, and so she's basically out to make them pay and also to figure out what happened to her sister. So that's kind of the gist of it. And I still found the mermaid lore in this to be very, very intriguing. I loved the specific flavor of mermaids that we got in this. I loved that this was a very scientific based approach to mermaids. There was a lot of science investigations going on, a lot of testing. The people on board the ship were many different varieties of scientists, all trying to, have the goal of figuring out whether the mermaids seen on this video documentary were true or not, whether they could actually exist in real life due to the science that we know. And yeah, that part was very, very interesting. However, the plot and the writing of this one unfortunately kind of let me down. When you read a novella, it is by default usually very fast-paced because it's so short. And I think coming out of that, I was expecting the novel to be a little bit more fast-paced than it was. I found it very meandering, very slow. We were also following in this novel so many point of views, so many that I think we could have definitely cut that down. I got them confused and mixed up at many points on like who we're actually following, and because of that, I just didn't enjoy it as much as I would have hoped, and I ended up ranking this one on tier 2 for meh. I'm definitely willing to give Mara Grant another opportunity to read another one of her books to see if it was just this one that wasn't jiving with me, because I did really enjoy the novella. However, this one just wasn't a hit for me. After that, again, let me kind of preface here that August and September were right at the beginning of me starting this YouTube channel. So now all of these books that I will be covering basically from this point on have most likely been talked about in one way or another on a video on my channel somewhere. So if you see a book that I mention and you want to, and it kind of intrigues you and you maybe want to hear more on like a more elaborated review from me, or watch my experience reading it in some kind of way. A lot of these I've vlogged. I will try to link the appropriate videos below, but also know that you can just go to my channel and many of these are can be found discussed over there. Okay. So this first one, Don't Let the Forest In, I read for my kind of revisiting Dark Academia after Ninth House kind of flopped for me. I wanted to give Dark Academia another go in the fall, so this was the first one that I ended up picking up. And this is a YA horror. Again, it's a Dark Academia following this boy who him and his twin sister attend this private boarding school, and he has a best friend that he meets there every year. And throughout the summer, he's noticed a kind of falling out between his twin sister and this friend that they have at the school, where they all used to be very tight and close and stay in contact. Something seems to have happened between them, and he doesn't understand why. And he's excited to get back to school at the beginning of the new school year to kind of reconcile that. He wants everything to go back to the way that it was. Unfortunately, when he gets to school, a bunch of other kind of spooky, crazy things start to happen that he can't explain. And his best friend that is at the school is like an artist. So he will write these short stories, and his best friend will kind of illustrate the monsters from his kind of horror, dark fairy tale type short stories. And he begins to notice that his friend's drawings are coming to life, and the monsters he's writing about that his friend is drawing, they're coming to life, and and they're actually terrorizing them. And so they have to stop these monsters from basically destroying them and their school. And this was such a good book. Like, for a YA, I was shocked. I was surprised about the depth that this book had, and the dynamics between the main character and his friend and his sister. I literally loved it so much. This book is one of my favorite books that I think I have read in the past 5 years or more. Yeah, this one got ranked in tier 5 for top tier. It was so good. And definitely kind of made me feel like, hey, maybe Dark Academia can be something that I can like. And I was way more excited to dive into the rest of the books in that Dark Academia video because of how amazing this one was. From there, I picked up my next Dark Academia book, which was Gothic Hannah by the author Rue Nix. And this one was supposed to be like a Dark Academia Gothic romance one. And I originally, when I did the first chapter taste test, thought that the first chapter was really strong, and I actually thought I was really going to end up loving this one. Unfortunately, the more I got into it, the more the love interest gave me the complete ick. I don't know. I could not get down with the whole professor student relationship. I know she's she's an adult. I think she was like 21 or 22. But the way that he kind of had a power dynamic imbalance, right? A power imbalance to start off with, being her professor. But the way that he like latched onto that and like romanticized that, but always kept mentioning it, like he emphasized it, like he loved that there was a power dynamic. And I don't know, I could not. So this one is in tier 1 for why. Not my thing. Not my, obviously not my trope. Obviously, I thought that the rest of like whatever was going on, like literally if we could remove that, I may have very well ended up liking this. But this was very much a romance, very much not my thing. After Gothic Hannah, I then went on to my next Dark Academia, which was the Dollhouse Academy by Margarita Montemore. And this one is set in the 90s, and it takes place at an academy, like a talent academy. So these two friends get enrolled to this talent academy, and they are there. Basically, they got scouted, and everybody who's at this academy has the potential to then like train, obviously, but then graduate and be managed by the company that also runs the academy. They have like these own like TV shows, their own TV shows. They have many stars have come out of this academy and are managed by this particular institution. And this one follows two main characters. So one of them is, like I said, one of the friends of that duo that were scouted together. And then another one is somebody who's been with or managed by the Dollhouse Academy, one of their biggest stars, who's been with them for a long time. It's following her point of view as well. And this had such great promise. Literally, like, as we were building up the storyline and I was seeing where the plot was going, I was really having a good time with this. I thought it was going to go in a direction that it ended up ultimately not going in. It kind of teased like it was, but then there was no payoff. Like, it never actually went there. It just kind of mentioned it. And those were the aspects that I was loving the most. I thought it was going to get a little bit more unhinged. I thought that there was going to be like this whole conspiracy, and we were going to see a lot more of like this corrupt institution that was managing these young talents, and of course basically taking hold and control of their life from that point on. And it just didn't go there. It just didn't go there as much as maybe I would have hoped. And so I ended up putting this one on tier 2 for meh. I don't think it was a bad book. I was just very disappointed that what I was most interested in felt like it was just kind of briefly like teased at, and then nothing actually ended up happening. So after that, then that kind of wraps up. Oh, no, it doesn't. There was one more dark academia book I read that month, which was A Study in Drowning. And this one is by Ava Reed. And this is a fantasy, dark academia, and it follows a girl who is going to this college, this architect college, even though she really wants to be part of the literature college. But the literature college is for males only in her society, and so she's not able to get in, so she kind of settles for architecture. However, one of these famous authors in her world and one of her favorite authors have recently died, and they open up this competition for an architect to be able to go to this recently deceased author's home, and it's falling in shambles. Like, it needs some help, so they're sending an architect to go and like renovate it basically. And as soon as she hears about it, she's like, I want to do that. So she applies and she ends up winning. They like her designs and she goes. However, when she goes, she is paired up with another student from the literature college, where she obviously has always desired to be. So there's some like jealousy and competition going on a little bit at first between the two. But once they get there at the home of this dead author's house, that she begins to unravel this mystery of who this author truly was and the life that he lived. And there is also like a romance subplot there between the two students as well. And this just had so many things to say about women, so many things to say about society, so many things to say about men and the power that they have historically held. And I really, really, really loved it. I loved the main character. I related a lot with her and her past traumas she's trying to work through. And I overall just had a really amazing time with this one. And so I am ranking this in tier 5 for top tier. I wanted to dive right into the sequel for this one, but I didn't actually have the sequel. But as soon as I finished, I read this on ebook or audiobook, back and forth. And as soon as I finished it, I was like, I'm going to order the physical copy of this and the sequel. And so I did that immediately because I loved it so much. So yeah, tier 5 for this one. That then is the end of my dark academia books, all that I read in the same dark academia vlog. And then I moved on from there to read a book called What Kind of Paradise? And this is by the author Janelle Brown. And it's a little hard to describe exactly what this book is. It's kind of like a thriller, but it's more kind of like a coming of age. This is basically following a young girl who was raised by her father, who was kind of like a very radical thinking conspiracy theorist and kind of like survivalist. So they lived alone in this small kind of cabin out in the middle of nowhere, and they would only go to town every now and then. And so basically, from the time she's a baby, all she ever knows is her dad and what her dad has told her about the world. And so she has very limited, I don't want to say limited life experiences, because of course she's lived a life, but very limited outside world experiences. And this is also kind of historical. I can't remember the exact time frame. I want to say late 90s or early 2000s, where technology just seems to be, or maybe it's early 90s, where technology seems to be like rapidly progressing. And her father is very anti-establishment, very anti-technology. He thinks that they're all corrupt and that they're going to bring the downfall of like the working man and humanity and all of that. And so she's raised on these very radical ideals. And then one day she finds herself in a situation where she's alone, and she has to navigate life in a world she knows very little of. And it kind of just follows her journey from there. And I really actually ended up liking this. It was not what I expected it to be. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I had a really good time with the era in which this happened. It was interesting to like revisit this time in the world and to see it through the eyes of somebody who is kind of discovering everything as it's brand new. And then the plot with her father and what really goes down with that was really, really intriguing, and I think it was really well done. The author did such a good job at describing the relationship and the experience of a young person who, when the one person you've always looked up to and always considered your hero and taught you everything about the world, what happens when you suddenly discover they're not who you thought they were, they're not who they've always said that they were, and everything that they taught you may not be the whole truth. So I ranked this in tier 4 for Give Me More. I would have loved to keep reading about this even after it ended. Like, I think it definitely wrapped up. The story definitely wrapped up. It had a very clear ending, very satisfying ending. I really did enjoy exploring the concepts inside of this book, and I am definitely interested in reading more from the author herself. All right, after I read that, I believe that was the last book for September, and we move to October, where I picked up Slewfoot by Brahm. This is the second book by Brahm that I have read, and this is a very witchy, historical witch book set back in like the Puritan years, where we have a woman whose husband recently died, and as we know, back then, women didn't have any power of their own. And so basically the whole community is now telling her what she needs to do with her life, how she needs to act, how she should grieve, how she should move on and not grieve, and all of these things. Specifically, her brother-in-law, her late husband's brother, is trying to basically take over her life and their farm and everything that they built. She's kind of, in whatever way that she possibly can, fighting against that, because she just wants to be able to live her own life now without having to be shoved under the power of another man, or under the household of another man, or having to marry another man, right? I would consider this one to be much more fantasy, maybe a little bit of a dark fantasy, then I really would consider it to be a horror, which is how I had it introduced to me as. This was a good story. I enjoyed reading about Abatha. I enjoyed where the plot went. I think that the people who wronged her definitely got what they deserved in the end. And yeah, I think the historical research and the world building around that was done really, really well. It just simply didn't go as dark as I would have hoped, under the impression that I had going into this story. Like, I thought I was getting like a witch horror novel, and it definitely was not really that. So I ended up ranking this one in tier 3 for That Will Do Donkey, and I am definitely still interested in reading more from Brom. The other book from Brom I've read is Krampus, and that one I did like a lot as well. So I would rank Krampus more on like tier 4. But yeah, definitely will read more from Brom. And if you are looking for a historical dark fantasy about the Puritans with some religious horror type stuff thrown in, and witchiness and whatnot, this is a solid book to read, a solid choice. And then from there, I went on to read another witch horror book called The Cunning Folk by Adam Neville. And this is the first book I've read from this author. And I found it to be an entertaining read. I simply did not jive with the author's writing style. I felt that he was very long-winded. He spent a lot of time describing things that I felt were unnecessary to the story and to the plot, and that kind of slowed down my reading and my enjoyment of it. I did read this for a vlog where I was reading a bunch of witch horror books. This one, Slewfoot, and I believe maybe one more after this. I actually can't remember. No, these were the only 2 I read in that vlog. And this was definitely a true witch horror. And it also had elements of like neighbor horror as well, which is another thing that I enjoy to read. I had personal experiences with terrible, horrific neighbors in my past. And so whenever that is kind of explored in a horror book, I always tend to really love it. Unfortunately, like I said, the writing just wasn't it for me, and I ended up putting this one in tier 2 for meh. And then from there, I read Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. This one is a historical fantasy that leans, I don't want to call it pure cozy fantasy. I've seen a lot of people call this like cozy fantasy, and while many aspects of this book are cozy, I would not label it as like a strict cozy fantasy, as it definitely has more depth. Not that cozy fantasy can't have depth. It has a lot more darkness and higher stakes plot than what I would consider a cozy fantasy to pursue, right? So this one, historical fantasy, follows an academic who is trying to put together the very first encyclopedia of fairies, because this is set in a historical Europe, kind of like in an alternate timeline where the fae actually exist and humans are able to study them. And they have, up where this novel is set, there hasn't been a solid like piece of literature that studies them as in depth as would be liked at all. And so this academic sets out to be the first author to release something like that. And so she spent a lot of her time, she spent a lot of her career going out into the field and researching the fae and learning as much as she can about them. And she's almost at the end, the point where she is able to finish her book. And so she ends up going to out into the field again, to this very snowy area, this very frozen wintry area, in this very kind of rural village, where they don't really understand each other's customs. So there's a little bit of a barrier there. There's a language barrier, but she's there because she wants to interview these people, get their stories about the type of specific fae that live in that area, and then, of course, go out and do field research to hopefully meet these fae, interact with them in some way, or watch them so that she can get as much research as she needs to finish out writing her encyclopedia. But of course, this is historical based. Again, themes of like women not having as much power and whatnot. And so she feels she's been overlooked in her area of study at her academy. As she's there going through this, she is met by one of her colleagues who also works at the college, and they kind of strike a deal. So they have a history together where they're cordial with each other, but there's also like this air of competition between the two because he seems to be recognized a lot more for his work that he's done when she feels she's done just as much or more work and has not been recognized for it simply for the fact that she's a woman. And he comes to help her with this. And at first, she's very resistant to him being there and helping. However, he basically offers this kind of truce where he's going to be there and help her with something. And in return, she's going to help him with something as well. And it's going to be something that she is going to benefit very greatly from. And so she agrees. And that's kind of where this story really truly picks up. I really loved the fairy lore in this story. I thought that learning the different tidbits about the different kinds of fae were very, very interesting. And I am looking forward to continuing the series and getting even more of that. This is one of those romance books where I found myself very emotionally attached, I can't find the word for it, but I thoroughly enjoyed the dynamic between these two characters, Emily and Wendell, who is her colleague who came to help. And of course, they kind of go from like being colleagues that are in semi-competition to having this truce to becoming maybe something a little bit more. And I really enjoyed that. I loved how he treated her. I loved how he never tried to like overshadow her and what she's done and let her do the things that she's good at while also being there to help and fill in those gaps on some of the things that, you know, maybe she's not good at, like talking to the locals and being charismatic. And I found it really satisfying read in basically every way. And I put this in tier 5 for top tier. I have the whole series here actually, and I have been itching to get through the other 2 books in this series. I actually think this might end up being a quartet instead of a trilogy. I initially thought it was a trilogy, but maybe it's going to be a quartet. And anyways, I'm very excited to continue reading in this one. And that wraps up what I read nope, I'm just kidding. I read one more. It was Payback's a Witch. And this one is a contemporary fantasy, also a romance, by Lana Harper. And this one follows a woman who grew up in this town that is ran by these, I think 4 families of witches, or 3 families of witches. 4 families of witches basically run this town behind the scenes. And she grew up, of course, in all of that. But when she came of age, she decided she didn't want anything to do with witchcraft or magic or this town, and she left to go build her life elsewhere. However, because she is like the heir to this family, to her particular family, and they hold this competition every generation to see who is going to be like the head family for that generation. Each heir is supposed to come and participate in this competition, this set of trials that they're holding. And she doesn't really want to, but she agrees to come back to the town and participate in this because her parents ask her to, and she feels like she owes them. So she comes back to town for the first time since leaving, and is basically relearning about her town and all of the people that she knew when she was growing up and seeing where they have gotten themselves at in life. You know, she has an ex-boyfriend who's bad news. He actually is going to be one of the other heirs in this set of trials. He burned her really bad when she was growing up, and is a major reason why she actually left town to get away from him. And then there are two other people from the other two trial or families in the trial. One is her best friend growing up's brother, and the other one is just another girl that she knew when she went to school, high school. And that is the person, that other girl is the person she ends up having a romance with. However, it kind of is triggered because during the trials, the girl she has a romance with, her best friend, and herself kind of all learn that they've been burned by the same man, which is her ex-boyfriend who's also participating in the trials. And they decide that they are going to kind of work together to do whatever it takes to stop him from winning and becoming the next head of town. And they are very, very set out on revenge, which is why it's called Payback's a Witch. But I found this to be a fun book. I found it to be very entertaining. I liked the various character dynamics and a lot of the themes that were explored. I didn't particularly love the main character and the way that she thought and treated people who love her and who's been there for her. But I ended up rating this one on tier 3 for That'll Do Donkey. I think that this book achieved what it set out to do, and it was overall enjoyable. And then from there, that is all of the books that I read in October, and we go into November, where I read Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison. And this is a werewolf horror novel that follows a woman who returns kind of in the same vein, kind of returns back to her hometown after being away for a long time and building her life elsewhere because her twin sister is pregnant and alone. And she is coming to kind of give support to her pregnant sister during this time as she gives birth and whatnot to help her out. So she takes some time off from work to come and do that. And again, she's just getting reacquainted with her family and her friends that she left behind. Kind of very similar to what I said in Payback's a Witch. However, this one is a werewolf horror. She ends up getting viciously attacked by this beast and triggering what may or may not be her descent into becoming a werewolf herself. And I really did enjoy the symbolism of all of that Rachel Harrison did with the main character, and not just the main character, but also the main character's sister, like changes to the body, changes to the life, evolution, rage, all of these things. I really like what she did with werewolf lore. And I generally enjoyed the dynamic between all of the different characters and the journey that the character went on, her story arc as a whole with her past traumas and the things she's gone through and what she's currently going through now. I really did have such a good time with. I don't want to say too much else about it because I think that saying anything else than that will give too much away. But I did rank this one in tier 4 for Give Me More. I've not read anything else by Rachel Harrison, but I definitely want to after reading Such Sharp Teeth. After that, I picked up The Wren and the Holly Library. This one is a fantasy romance that is based on like the Beauty and the Beast fairy tale. But the difference is that this one is set in like an alternate timeline of contemporary times when there has been like this monster war. So monsters revealed themselves to be real. And after that, this triggered like a monster war, which kind of devastated civilization. And so now they're back in a world where it's contemporary, but everything's kind of been wreaked havoc. There's not like cell phones anymore. There's not like internet, but people are living in kind of like dead cities, right? And cities that have been, particularly, I think this is based in New York, and New York has now been sanctioned into different districts that are ran by different kinds of monsters. And our main character is a thief, and she breaks into this, she gets assigned this job. She takes this job where she breaks into this big fancy mansion house inside to his library to steal this particular thing. However, she gets caught, and the person who catches her was like, "Hey, you have magic." And she's like, "Magic doesn't exist. No, I do not." And he's like, "Yeah, you do, or else you wouldn't have been able to get into my house. So why don't you come and work for me?" And basically it kicks off her now being involved into the world of monsters, realizing she's more part of it than she ever thought she was, and what that means, you know, for herself and for her friends and the life that she's been living. And it's a romance, of course, between her and this man's house that she broke into. And he kind of is becoming her mentor in a way. Anyways, the romance was not my thing. I ended up not loving the romance at all. The writing was not particularly the best. The story itself was entertaining, and I think that I liked the direction it went in a lot of ways, and then in a lot of ways I didn't. I think that the story that the author wrote just focused on my least favorite aspects the most, and so that kind of just tarnished my enjoyment of it. I'm putting this one in tier 2 for meh, because it wasn't a bad book, it just wasn't the book for me. And then we go to December. I will preface this by saying I only read one book in December, and that is because I got very busy with school, college life, and then my kids got out of school for 2 weeks, and we did a bunch of holiday stuff, and I had like no time for reading. I did read or start reading a few other books, but since I didn't finish those books in December, I'm not counting them under my 2025 reading. And so the only book that I read this month was called Zombie by Ian Rob Wright. It is a zombie horror book. Shocker. And this is book 2 in a series called The Cursed Manuscripts, I believe. And I read the first one called Witch years ago and always thought, like, kept this in the back of my brain that I'd like to continue. And so since I was looking for something easy to get into, not too heavy, kind of like a quick, fast, fun-paced horror novel, sort of like what Witch was when I first read it, I decided to go ahead and pick this one up. And I didn't love it. I didn't love this one. I didn't find it as enjoyable as I remember finding Witch. I think that the thing that the author was trying to say about our main character and her marriage to a very controlling, abusive man was great. However, it dragged and it repeated itself, and it kind of like knocked you on top of the head with a hammer, basically his message of what he was trying to say over and over and over again. And the zombie parts were cool. The zombie parts were very typical zombie stuff. I don't know. I kept stopping and coming back. It wasn't holding my attention. I didn't necessarily care about where we were at, but since it was one that I had already started, whenever I did find a few minutes to read, it's the one that I just kept picking up and coming back to until it was finished. But I just didn't love it. I didn't have a good time with it at all. So I'm putting this in tier 1 for why. I'm a little unsure now on whether I want to continue the series or not, because I do remember enjoying Witch way more than I enjoyed this one. I may give this series, like the next one in the series, like a little try. I might like pick it up, read the first couple chapters, see if I'm vibing with it, and decide from there if I should DNF or not. I don't know. But yeah, that concludes the 51 books that I have read in all of 2025, and this is our overall current ranking. I think, as you can see here, I read a big variety of books, and I am very pleased with the general outcome of the year. I found a few like really, really high rated favorites of mine this year, and of course I've read a few duds, but I'm generally pleased with, like, I feel like this year was a good reading year for me. Um, and with that said, I would love to know what you think about the books that I read this year. And if there is, like, after seeing this, if you are like, huh, you seem to like this book and this book, so I think you might also love this book. If you have any recommendations for me, please list them down in the comments. I'm always looking for new potential favorite reads. And of course, let me know what your favorite read of 2025 was as well. In my next video, I am actually going to be taking my top favorite from each month that I read them and putting them in a bracket to see what my, have them battle it out and see what my ultimate favorite read of 2025 was. And I'm so excited, and I hope to see you there. Please like this video and subscribe if you have enjoyed this kind of reminiscent bookish look back on 2025. And I am so happy to have you here and to continue chatting with you throughout 2026. So with that said, you have a lovely rest of your day, rest of your night, wherever you are in the world, and I will see you next time. Bye.